This is AHA Business Radio, creating AHA moments for business, by business, and about business, providing opportunities to discover information to help you run your business and guide your decision making. The more you know, the better decisions you make. AHA Business Radio is produced by Allan Hirsh Advisors. For more information, log on to ahabusinessradio.com. To join in tonight's conversation, call 410-481-1300. Now, here's your host for AHA Business Radio, Allan Hirsh.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's show. My guest this evening is Allan Walden. He's the Republican candidate for mayor. Allan, welcome to the show.
Very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you joining us this evening. So, first question I always ask my guests, what motivates you and I usually ask to get up in the morning, but what is motivating you to run for mayor of Baltimore City?
Well, we moved here about 3 decades ago, fell in love with the city, and I spent most of my life, most of my career here, talking about Baltimore on the radio, doing news, doing commentary, and being involved in a lot of civic organizations along the way. And it occurred to me in the recent past that I really don't like the way the city is going. I don't like the direction that it has been taking for the past several years. So I talked to some good friends and I talked to family members, and no one said you're crazy. They all said, if this is what you feel you must do, go ahead and do it, and so I did.
So what are some of this show's about business. So one of the things, what is your feeling and program that you're talking about in order to build the business environment, entrepreneurship, and business development within Baltimore City?
I was at a meeting a few months ago with a representative of Governor Hogan's office, and he made a really smart, short comment that has resonated with me. He said the city of Baltimore is the cool factor divided by taxes. So you start at that point. The real estate tax is the one that really bothers me, because I was up on Slade Avenue in Baltimore last weekend, and on one side of Slade Avenue is Baltimore City, on the other side is Baltimore County, and I was thinking, if I'm on this side, I'm paying $2.24 per $100 of assessed valuation, and if I cross the street, I'm paying $1.10. Something is wrong with this picture, and I think the tax rate, especially the real estate tax rate in Baltimore, is one of the things that holds back greater business development for the city.
So what is your plan for that? How would you change that?
You've got to cut taxes. That sounds simple.
I understand.
I know that the incumbent mayor has a plan to reduce the property tax rate by 30% over a period of 10 years. That's what we do here. That's what we have constantly done here, is we take stutter steps along the way. We spread it out over a long period of time, and 10 years from now, we really haven't accomplished a great deal.
So
I want to cut that tax rate 30%, but I want to do it all at once.
So
now,
how do we then pay?
Suck in their breath and say, my goodness, how can you do that?
Well, that's my next question. And it's interesting. You picked the location of Park Heights and Slade Avenue. I live on Park Heights, just in the city, and my dad lives on Slade Avenue, just in the county.
Okay, then you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because I live basically at that corner between my dad and myself. So I know what you're talking about. So how do you propose to fund I want to talk about some of these issues: police department, the security and the safety, our educational system, and I want to talk about that if we have time, because I think it has a lot of needs as well. How do we pay for all that when the largest single income for the city is our property taxes?
I understand that. You have to start reducing expenditures in other areas. We have hundreds of millions of dollars we can't account for in the city of Baltimore. The government cannot account for them. I keep hearing people saying over and over again, we need accountable, transparent government, and I wonder what they've been doing up until now.
Okay.
They should have been doing it long before now. So we have to start reducing expenditures where they can be reduced in city departments, with 3 absolutely off the table that cannot be reduced. That's police, fire, and schools. You can't underfund any of those. But virtually everything else can be reduced. And we can still count, I believe, on the state and the federal government to help us do this. And most importantly, it will send a message to people outside of Baltimore, in the suburbs, or even farther out, who are considering relocating their homes, going to school, relocating businesses, developing businesses, that this city is serious about wanting business, about wanting larger populations, about wanting people to come here. So we have to start somewhere, and it may be a hard hit to begin with. Okay. And I understand it may be painful. But if you raise the tax base, which is what will happen as businesses and people come to the city, things will get better. And it may happen more quickly than some people think. So
you're saying that the budget for the police, fire, and schools is something we have to fully fund.
We do.
And well, I have a question in the police, and I was one of the things that I understand is we have a separate police department and the Department of Education in our school system, separate from the police department of the city. What is one of the things that sounds like you're
Go ahead.
Okay. So what is sound effects for tonight?
Yeah, well, we need some of that.
Yes, we do.
It's called ambiance.
Yes, we do. And it's very strange for me sitting here talking to you, having only done this for a couple of years, knowing your history of 30 years plus in this city, being on the radio. So I appreciate your being here. So we have two separate police departments. How do you account for that? It's two separate sets of management of the police department. Why aren't they? Would you make them one?
What are you talking? Which police department?
We have a Baltimore City Police Department.
Baltimore City Police Department.
And the school system and the school system have a police department.
Yeah.
They're independent. In the other jurisdictions, they're the same. And I've heard some stories, for example, in Baltimore County, where they police the school systems with police officers. So if there is an issue, someone within a student within the school has a friendship or knows the police officer that deals with that school and has a trusting relationship because they know them. And a lot of the things that I would think could go into a criminal record get averted because there is this understanding between the students and the police where there is none in the Baltimore City system.
I agree with that, and I think it's a good idea to combine those two police departments. It makes perfectly good sense to me. The problem we have is that in 1997, Baltimore City ceded control, virtually full control, of its schools to the state. Literally threw up its hands and said, we can't do this anymore. We're running out of money. We'll give it to the state. Big mistake. Baltimore City must control its own schools. We've got to get the state legislature and members of the city council and the Hogan administration to help us regain control of our school system, because the school system literally hemorrhages money, a lot of which we cannot account for.
So how would you go about accounting for the money that's being spent in the various, you talked about, in this particular case, the school system, and some of the other departments within the city that you say is unaccounted for?
We've got to audit these things, and really, I mean strictly, deliberately, painstakingly audit everything. I want to know where every dime has gone and why it's gone there. I want to know where this money has disappeared, gone off in smoke. We have to be able to control our finances more correctly. If we can do that, and I believe we can, if we can control the finances of the city of Baltimore well enough, we can do virtually anything.
Well, I agree with that, and we're going to take our first break. As I go to the commercial break, we're going to have the traffic update. And when we come back, I will continue the discussion with Allan Walden, Republican candidate for mayor of Baltimore City. Later in the show, I will have the AHA Business Trivia Contest. I'm Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio, 1300 AM.
Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating aha moments for business, by business, and about business. Once again, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Well, welcome back to the show. My guest tonight is Allan Walden. He's the Republican candidate for mayor. If you have any questions or comments and want to talk to Allan or I, please call us at 410-481-1300. So, Allan, you there?
Yes.
Okay. Getting back to taxes, one of the things that I've heard a lot from business owners, and you talked about the real estate property tax, but what about the real property tax that businesses have to pay on their assets?
That, too, should be reduced. I'm a tax cut kind of guy. I want to reduce as much of the tax burden as is possible on both individuals and business in Baltimore City as a way to attract new business and new residents. Now, we can't give away the store. We can't simply stop collecting taxes, but we can adjust the rates more reasonably than they currently exist.
So where do you think, you mentioned 30% for the real estate tax?
For the property tax,
real estate property tax. Where do you see, in your thoughts and your proposals, and I know it can change once you get involved and see the real numbers, if you can find the real numbers, as you said. So what would you propose to reduce the business property tax?
Quite honestly, I have not gotten that thoroughly into that particular element of it yet. And I plan to, because it's part of the overall plan to reduce the costs and the burdens on both business and individuals in Baltimore. But I'm not going to give you an off-the-top-of-my-head answer when I'm not fully prepared for it.
I appreciate that honesty. And what about the income tax?
See, income tax in Maryland it's fairly high, but it's not as high as it is in some other places. We could knock 1 percentage point off it and probably wouldn't suffer terribly.
Well, and you're talking about the state's income tax or the state's portion of that, or the state's income tax?
I'm talking about having the state help us do it. We can't do this alone. Right. I'm not going to operate in a vacuum and pretend that I have all the answers and can simply march into City Hall and say, this is what we're going to do.
Okay.
But to put these ideas, to put these proposals out there immediately and say, we can't wait any longer. We can't nibble around the edges. We cannot wait 10 or 15 or 20 years for this to show results. We have to do it now, because by not doing it now, we find ourselves in the circumstances that now exist in Baltimore City.
Are you aware of the proposal that the Augustine Commission proposed last legislative session in cutting the income taxes in the state? Are you aware of those recommendations?
Not fully, no.
And I don't have the exact numbers here, but I think that takes that approximately 1% in play for corporate and personal, and also was an attempt to balance, just so you know, to balance the difference between corporate income tax and pass-through income tax for LLCs and subchapter S corporations.
Well, then we're on the same page.
Right.
We're moving in the same direction, basically for the same reason. This is a one major factor or one major issue in the campaign that I've been running so far. We've got to get the city moving. We've got to jumpstart it. And these are things that can be done to jumpstart the economy. Of course, we've got a lot of other problems we've got to deal with along the way.
Absolutely. One of them I know is we talked about it briefly, the educational system in the city. So one of the thoughts that you talked about in the earlier part of the show was the city taking back control of the education in Baltimore City.
Yes, and changing the curricula. Part of the problem we have in the city of Baltimore is the lack of a trained workforce. Let's put it on that economic level. In order for people to want to relocate businesses here, they have to have trained workers. And even now, we import them from the counties, or we even bring them in from out of state, because we need trained workers. And when I say workers, I mean people who work with their hands. Electricians, carpenters, mechanics, welders, people who, again, work with their hands. We don't teach that in the Baltimore City school system.
When I was a student
to the
here,
degree that we should.
When I was here, we used to.
I know that, and we still have VOTEC schools. We've got places like Mervo and Carver that teach vocational education. Not enough. We have to teach the young people in Baltimore City how to work. We can't tell them that, okay, we're going to run you through the school system, you're going to get a diploma when you finish high school, and then you go running off, or we'll send you off, or we'll direct you off to a college or a trade school to learn something else. They should have the skills. The young men and young women in our high schools should have the skills when they leave school, so that if they want to go on to college, they can. There's no reason why they shouldn't, even though it is a myth that a college degree will guarantee you a job. It absolutely does not. But if they want to work, they want to get a job right now, they can go to a prospective employer and say, look, here I am, and I have the skills. So I would like to turn many more of the high schools in Baltimore City to vocationally oriented high schools, vocationally oriented secondary schools. I do not mean abandon the core subjects. You don't abandon language, you don't abandon social studies, you don't abandon mathematics. But the last 2 years of high school, for those who want to do it, should be dedicated to vocational education.
Well, and this is something that I agree with you on as well. And I don't know if you've listened to the show in the past, but I have a number of people, and we've talked about this. Only less than 50% of our high school graduates anywhere, and I don't know the number in Baltimore City, actually go to post-secondary education. So they're coming, as you said, they're coming out of schools without the ability to find a job. And there are 20,000 or more construction jobs
that are going unfilled.
Absolutely, in this state. And we could fill them in the next 2 to 5 years by doing by changing and reinstituting the technical and vocational training in our schools for those that have no desire to go to college. And yes, to me, that's middle income. They can earn $25, $35 an hour. That's middle America.
Alan, my son is a master carpenter. He works with his hands. He tried college and he didn't like it. He said, Dad, I want to work with my hands. He works in Seattle, in the Seattle area of Washington State. $40, $50 an hour, and he could work 7 days a week if he wished, because there are always construction jobs and carpenters in demand.
Absolutely. And that, if you figure it out on a 40-hour work week, $50 an hour is $100,000 a year.
That's right. And that's the kind of work that is available, provided you have the skills to do it.
I agree 100%. I just want to I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'll remind the audience that I'm talking to Allan Walden, the Republican candidate for mayor. Please give us a call at 410-481-1300 if you have any questions for the candidate or myself. So what else would you do with the school system? Or is that really
That's the most important issue. I'd also take a look at the table of organization of the school system. We have 10,800 employees in the Baltimore City school system. We spend $17,000 per year per student to educate the young people of Baltimore, and yet, in an assessment of the 100 major city urban school districts in the United States, they're ranked at the bottom. More than half I shouldn't say more, but about half the employees of the Baltimore City school system are not teachers. Now, I know we need administrators. We need school police. We've already dealt with that to some degree. We need janitors. We need caretakers. We need advisors. But how many and for how much?
Well,
and shouldn't more of that money be going directly into the classroom? I think so.
Well,
I think North Avenue needs a major shakeup.
Well, if you remember the old book, The Peter Principle, which was really developed based on some of the educational systems in this country.
Yes, people rise to their level of incompetence,
right.
as I recall.
Yeah, they take a lot of great teachers and promote them and take them out of the classroom where they really do their job and make them supervisors. And I don't know the numbers, but I think it's a very interesting approach to try to thin out the management within the school system. I
think it has to be done.
Okay, very good. We're going to go to, Alan, we're going to go to the next break. And so when we come back, I will have the continued discussion with Allan Walden, the Republican candidate for mayor. And later in the show, I have the AHA Business Trivia Contest. I'm Alan Hirsh, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Radio 1300 AM.
Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating aha moments for business, by business, and about business. Once again, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Well, welcome back to the show. I'm talking to Allan Walden, who's the Republican candidate for mayor. Sorry about that, Alan. If you have any questions, please give us a call at 410-481-1300. Alan, before I go back to you, I do have a caller, Matthew. Matthew, you have a question or a comment?
A couple of things. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Well, welcome. Thanks for calling.
This last segment you covered, I am a degreed carpenter. I'm not originally from the area. I've been here about 25 years. When my parents first moved down here, there was plenty of carpentry work here, and that's actually my son was when I was going to college. It's shrank considerably, and I understand that candidate, your son, is working in the Seattle area, which right now, for carpenters, is a great area. But unfortunately, as a carpenter, you end up basically chasing work wherever there are buildings where you go. My question is, I went to Voctech. I went to the number one Voctech in the state of Pennsylvania, Muriel Dobbins. I graduated with a degree in carpentry, went on to college for communications, studied, worked in the D.C. area, worked for an MCI subcontractor. And fortunately and unfortunately, I've used the skills that I learned from my grandfather and my father. I drive a truck.
So what's your question?
Well, having been through ups and downs, the credit crunch and everything else, my question is that what are you doing, and your emphasis on education and arts, and not necessarily arts, but math and sciences, which seems to be the trend in the country now, rather away from manufacturing, just due to the fact that we're going to get killed on manufacturing costs, labor costs, materials and such from overseas.
There's a lot of building going on in Baltimore right now. If you look around the city, you go anywhere in the city right now, and there is building underway. There is new construction underway, and that, among other things, requires carpenter. I have no idea the number of people, but it will be in the thousands that will be working on the Port Covington project. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, because there are other areas that are being built as well. We need, again, as I said earlier, skilled people who know how to work with their hands. And we already discussed the fact that there are maybe 20,000 construction jobs that are going unfilled because we don't have the skilled workforce. Change the manner in which we educate our children, change the manner in which they are taught how to work, or in fact, teach them how to work, and the situation changes.
Matthew, I would suggest that Alan's absolutely right. Between Port Covington, and which I want to talk to Alan about later in the show, and also the Trade Point Atlantic, the old Sparrows Point area, there's almost 4,000 acres of new development in the Baltimore metropolitan area. I would just go to carpentry companies. I'd go to commercial contractors and just go and meet with them. I wouldn't sit back and wait for the ad. The ads don't show up in the paper. I'd be proactive. I'd go to them. I'd go to the job sites, ask for the superintendent. If they need a trained carpenter, and many of them you might have a job there. So I wish you the best of luck in getting a carpentry job. And so good luck to you. Let's go on with Alan. Let's continue our conversation. So when we were talking, and maybe let's talk about this just a minute. Actually, before I do that, I want to talk about the police department. One second.
I knew we'd get to that.
And that is, we talked about the two police departments. But what's your feeling on this surveillance that's been going on that was secret and we still don't know a lot about?
You mean the surveillance by the police department?
Yes.
Doesn't bother me that much. I think part of the job of the police department is to keep watch over the city. That's their job. Their job is to make sure the city is as safe as possible. Now, I know we have a problem. We have an investigation underway at the Baltimore City Police Department. I know and I agree with the fact that some of its tactics and some of its procedures must be changed. But the majority of police officers in this town, and this was verified by an op-ed piece some months ago by the U.S. Attorney for the state of Maryland, the majority of the police in this town want to do what they are paid to do, and that is be our first line of defense, our guardians of the city. And I think that surveillance is part of that. Let's face it, Allan, we lost our privacy a long time ago, whether we wanted to or not. The minute you get a Social Security card, virtually anybody can track you anywhere. And even if you don't have one, electronic surveillance, I'm not talking about eyes in the sky or secret surveillance, but what is on the internet will allow virtually anybody to find out virtually anything about you.
About the internet, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting, the internet's only 25 years old, yet how it's changed the way we live and the information we get is absolutely amazing. So anything else you want to talk about with the police department? I know and I'd love to see, and I hope you would too, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, see the community working with the police instead of at odds with the police.
We can deal with that. Let me deal with it in the following manner. Let's start with Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter campaign, according to most people, began with what happened in Ferguson, Missouri a couple of years ago. And it was exacerbated by the Freddie Gray case. And that is not the case. Black Lives Matter actually began in Baltimore in 1985. In 1985, Parren Mitchell, then a member of the House of Representatives, made the following statement. He said, killing us is genocide. Actually, it's more fratricide, which is even worse. And a few years later, then Mayor Kurt Schmoke appealed to the people of the city of Baltimore to cooperate with the police department. It fell on deaf ears. There are sections of Baltimore City which are held in terror, held enthralled by overarmed young people who are either dealing drugs and or members of gangs and or just have weapons available to them and go out at random shootings. 18 people shot over the past weekend. That's an appalling number. 8 of them in one incident, one of them a 3-year-old. That has to stop, and the only way it can stop is for the people in these communities to stand up and say, these are our neighborhoods, this is our home, these are our streets, we will not allow this to go on any longer. And the easiest way to do that is to pick up the phone when you see something wrong, call 911, and have the police respond to it. Do not allow the people who are terrorizing you to hide in plain sight.
Well, one other question I have with the policing, because you mentioned the drug culture in this society. I also remember something else that Kurt Schmoke introduced when he was mayor, really on a national level, the idea of decriminalizing drugs. What is your thought on that? Because depending on the statistics, somewhere between 70 and 90% of our entire prison population across the country is drug-related.
Well, first of all, let's talk about addicts and the people who sell drugs in two different ways. Addicts, as far as I'm concerned, are victims. Most drug addicts are victims. It really is a public health problem. It's like being addicted to cigarettes or addicted to alcohol. It is an addiction, and it should be treated as such. As far as the drug trade is concerned, there was a time in this country back in the early 20th century when heroin was legal. It became illegal because so many people were overusing it. And so now it is illegal. The issue of decriminalizing drugs, we're already doing it, by the way, excuse me, with marijuana. The idea of decriminalizing drugs may have a certain appeal, like the repeal of prohibition. You can equate it with that. But what happens then? Do we wind up with a greater population using drugs because they are now legal? Does the government take control of the drugs? And if so, how does it control them? There are so many unanswered questions. I am not willing to say right now, oh yes, it's time to decriminalize all drugs.
But what I'm hearing, if I'm not incorrect, is that it's something you think we should be looking at. You're not ready to do it because you don't know the process or the plan to do it. But you think, as a mayor of Baltimore City, where there's so much drug crime, that it's something we should be thinking about.
It's something we should think about. It's a major problem. It's a major factor in crime in this city. We can't simply say we're going to go on exactly the way we're going and everything will be fine. Somehow we'll find an answer. It has to be studied more carefully before any decision is made to change it.
Well, thank you. We're now, Allan, we need to go to our last break before the next segment. So when we come back, I will have the AHA Business Trivia Contest and continue the discussion with Allan Walden, the Republican candidate for mayor of Baltimore City. I'm Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio 1300 AM.
Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating AHA moments for business, by business, and about business. And now it's time for tonight's AHA Trivia Question, where you can win great prizes from the AHA Business Radio Show. Call 410-481-1300 if you know the answer. And now, with tonight's AHA Trivia Question, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Well, welcome back to the show. Tonight's trivia question is, who was the last Republican mayor of Baltimore City? We talk about how it's been dominated over the years by Democrats, but who was the last Republican mayor of Baltimore City? Allan, I know you know I'm sure you know.
Yes, I do.
But let's have a caller call in. The caller with the correct answer at 410-481-1300 will receive a gift certificate to the 1010 American Bistro, a Big Bagby Restaurant Group member in downtown Baltimore. And I am talking to Allan Walden. He's the Republican candidate for mayor. So, Allan, a couple things I wanted to talk about. You mentioned the Port Covington project, and I know, was it last week, the City Council finally approved the $660 million tax bond program, or TIF. What's your feeling of having the city involved in these kinds of real estate investments?
I don't think it's a bad idea at all. I know that a TIF, tax increment financing, is a crapshoot because the payoff comes down the road. It doesn't come immediately. But we got to think about Kevin Plank, who has become the number one entrepreneur in Baltimore City, and we need more of them. That's why I'm so keen on cutting taxes and cutting them sharply as soon as we possibly can. It's a good idea. It's on the waterfront, and the complaint, of course, is that once again we're developing along the water because we love the water and the interior of the city suffers. And there is certain validity in those arguments. But the land was available, and he's made an enormous personal investment, not only in Port Covington, but now what's going to happen over at Sparrows Point. And, of course, he's acquired the water taxi service, and he has other business developments going on around the city. He has made an enormous personal investment in Baltimore City, for which we should be grateful. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason to give him a free ride, but he's not getting a free ride.
Absolutely. Allan, let me interrupt you because we do have a caller, I think, on the trivia question.
Okay.
We have Bob from Baltimore. Bob, what's the answer to the trivia question?
I think it is Theodore McKeldin.
Absolutely. He actually was the last two Republicans.
Right.
In 1943 to 47, and again in 63 to 67. Thank you for calling. I'm going to put you on hold, and if you'll talk to Nathan, the producer, he'll get your address, and we'll get that gift certificate off to you in the mail in the next couple days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling.
Let me stop you for a minute before we go back into the hard questions. But talking about Theodore McKeldin, I want you to think about something. I want your audience to think about something for a minute. We're talking about more than half a century since the last Republican mayor in the city of Baltimore. And if memory serves, we haven't had a Republican on the city council since before World War II. There's something wrong with one-party rule where the same people do the same things over and over and over again, and somehow we expect a different outcome.
Thank you for that. And so, Allan, let's get back to your support of the Port Covington. But the city is doing their partnership. When they talk about the residents, there's the 44 or 48 acre project in East Side Development, where they're working with Hopkins and private industry to develop the whole a 48 acre space within Baltimore City, residential and so forth. So they're doing that. But for business, for those listening, Port Covington, between that and the Sparrows Point, are the two largest oceanfront port available land in the East Coast.
Yes.
And not to take it, from my point of view, and not to take advantage of them, with the port being one of the greatest assets we have in the state and the city for business and building development, particularly from international trade. I think we have to. Baltimore County is at Sparrows Point, but the city at Port Covington. It's like when we started with the Charles Center downtown in the early or mid '50s. And they're still building on that based on Harbor East today, that growth that's all developed based on this program 60 years old.
And the point is?
And the point is we need public partnerships to make some of this work.
Oh, of course we do. You and I are in total agreement on that. I'm a strong believer in private-public partnerships, and I am an even stronger believer in the job of government to create the atmosphere, to create the environment, to create the structure in which private people, private citizens, and private industry can do their best. And I think the Port Covington project is an element of that. And that kind of development can only help Baltimore. We've got 622,000 people in the city right now. Once upon a time, we had 900,000. We were pushing toward 1 million. I can see a city with 800,000 people again, maybe even more, if we take the steps that are necessary to attract big business, entrepreneurship, small business, and population.
So how do you... In certain areas of Baltimore City, and I don't want to use, but there's lack of entrepreneurship, there's lack of business. So we've talked about the bid project. How do you propose to bring entrepreneurship and business into some of the areas like West Baltimore, where the Freddie Gray incident occurred? How do we do that?
Well, we can do it. We can do some of it through mass transportation. I am a huge believer that the best, most efficient, most ecologically safe way to transport people is by rail. Now, I think the Red Line project, which was deep-sixed by Governor Hogan, was a good idea gone bad. I don't want to dig huge holes through major portions of the city to put down a new subway line. When surface mass transit, surface rail, trolley cars can do the job. I can see part of my vision is a trolley car line. Call it a light rail line, but it's the same thing, running the length of North Avenue. Now, the thing about trolley cars is they do several things. One, they're easy to get on and get off. They don't intrude on traffic as much as buses do when they come in and out of curbs and stop for red lights, and they simply get in the way of vehicular traffic. But trolley cars do a wonderful thing. A, they imply movement. B, they imply energy. And C, and this is not an overstatement, they're fun. People like to ride them. They simply do. And if you run a light rail line along North Avenue, it will energize not only the avenue itself, but the neighborhoods on both sides. That's a spur for small business development, among other things.
Well, yes. I mean, that's part of the thing. If you look at the most of the subway stops in cities, economic development grows up around those stops because there are people there.
That works. And have you driven along North Avenue recently?
Yes, very recently.
Okay. The architecture is magnificent. There is marvelous architecture along North Avenue. There are wonderful opportunities to redevelop historic properties and turn that part of the city into a magnet, not only for business and industry, but even for visitors, if it's done properly. But I think the light rail line, a trolley car line along North Avenue, would do a great deal to make that happen.
So where else would you put a trolley car? You're talking about North
I'd let it run. Well, it has to be, I hate to use the word study because study means committees and committee means time. And we have to do these things as quickly as possible. Light rail, by the way, is relatively easy to build because it's on the surface. It's easy to build and easy to maintain than subways are, for example, underground lines, third rail lines. But I can see light rail going all the way over to the east side, perhaps doglegging on Broadway, and then running out through Fells Point and Canton to the eastern extremes of the city. I think that would be another way, and connected, of course, at least having a stop in the logical place with the north-south light rail line, which works very well. We need east-west rail service now, which we do not have.
And I would also think we need something. Well, we have light rail from northwest, and we have the subway from northwest. But one of the big things is our transportation. And I've had some of the people on here about transportation on the show. Our system was built in the 1950s, and everything goes through the center of downtown Baltimore.
Yep.
Rather than sometimes around Baltimore. So maybe, maybe because the transportation system is not necessarily the city-owned, but the Economic Alliance within the Baltimore metropolitan area, do some light rail that actually might be around the Beltway.
You could do that, but I'd be more inclined initially to deal with the east-west route. I think that's more important right now.
Okay. We only have a little less than a minute left in the show. Anything that you think we left out that you'd like to express to the listeners about your plans for Baltimore City?
Well, we've covered a lot of the ground already. I was listening to your commercial, and I smiled when I heard it because the slogan on my material, the material I distribute, is, "He'll make a difference." And I will make a difference because the approach is different. I have been, since I came to this town, a drum beater, a cheerleader for the city of Baltimore. We have to stop apologizing for Baltimore and start celebrating what we have here. And what we have already is a great deal to attract people, and now we have to build on that.
Well, Allan, I want to thank you very, very much for being on the show this evening. If our listeners want to reach you for whatever reason, whether it's a donation, how can they reach you?
They can easily reach me by email at waldenformayor@gmail.com, and I invite them to visit my website, which is waldenformayor.com.
Well, Allan, again, I want to thank you. I wish you the best of luck on November 8th in the election, and I look forward to hearing about you and the campaign as it moves forward.
Thank you, Allan. Appreciate being on the show.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I also want to thank my producer, Nathan, who makes things work here. I also want to make sure that everybody please join me next Tuesday At 6 p.m., my guest will be Catherine Pugh, the Democratic candidate for mayor of Baltimore City. I'm Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors, your host. To reach me, call 443-977-4500 or visit my website, www.allanhirshadvisors.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. This has been AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio 1300 AM.